Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm here to discuss with Odon just who are these Mushrikun in the Quran. So it's been a very interesting discussion. So I want to explore the history of this term, the Mushrikun, who these people are, what the Muslims have been saying through the centuries, and just trying to add details, add specifics, and then look at the confusion and the contradictions within the Quran, and also how over time Christians go from those who are worthy of salvation as long as they follow the creed that they're supposed to follow to those who become rejected, just like the Jews, and so on. So yeah, we'll dive into that. So welcome, Odon. Thank you for joining me again this evening.
Hello, Lloyd. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here again for another very interesting discussion, I think.
Yeah, actually, remember I have this author that I've been talking to, and he and I had a couple of discussions today and over the last week or so, one or two, and he's got some interesting ideas that might bear discussing with you as well, as to the creation of the narrative, how some of the fabrications happen, because he's an author and he's fascinated by Islam, and he's put together a number of theories which make sound sense to me, which also converges with many of the things you said. So I don't find any contradictions with the things that you've been saying, and it aligns with everything that I've been saying. So there's these odd convergences as to how did these fabrications come about? Who made them? When were they made? And that might be worthy of discussion in a while. So something I'll discuss with you again later. So yeah, hello everyone. Centuries since, Mushrikun assemble. Hello, Sandro and Viceroy. Yeah, and Nicodemus, welcome. Okay, yeah, so let me just share my screen, and this is where we ended last time. Islam and the stone idols. So here's Muslims doing Muslimy things which have nothing to do with paganism or rock idols, because as you know, Christians go to church and they go to the crucifix and they give it a good lick. Or maybe we don't. Actually, I think we don't. So yeah, because that's just disgusting. And we would call this paganism when you start having pet rocks. And, this guy looks like he's having an orgasm there with that rock. So, yeah, this is kind of pagan. You'd agree with that, Odon. You already have, right? This does not look as if this is worship of a rock.
Yeah, of course it is. But I would add a tiny nuance to it. You really choose the worst of pictures because I'm sure you could find some Christian worship with pictures who would look like this. There are some Christians who kiss statues, for example. I went to Jerusalem and I went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and
Right.
there is this rite there among Orthodox Christian women. They take their infants, their newborns, or very, very little kids, and they put them on a sort of a stone at the entrance of the Holy Sepulchre, which this stone is very ancient, and it is believed that Jesus walked on this stone. And by putting the kids on the stone,
Right.
they expect blessings and so on.
Right.
Is it pagan or pagan-like? It resembles a bit what Muslims are doing with the Kaaba. But I fully agree. It's the Kaaba and the black stone.
Well, I mean, going to a holy site and expecting blessings, but this stone forgives sins, which is why they're touching it. So, which is something only God can do. So, this stone is God on earth. So,
The thing with Islam is that it's not coherent. It's supposed to be a monotheism. So every practice like this should be banned.
Yeah.
But it's the same with the devotion to Muhammad or the devotion to the Quran. They shouldn't exist within Islam.
Right.
Shirk.
So, On Robertson needs to wash his eyes with holy water. So, yeah, you handle that, and we will be waiting right here for you to get back. You're right. I should get a little bottle of holy water and spray my face as well. All right. So I will come back to the discussion of syncretism. That's going to be relevant to us. But first, I'm going to make a small deviation. We're going to talk about the Sabians or the Sabiyun. So an introductory page, then I'm going to go to a paper that was written something like 60, 70 years ago in the 50s, I believe. So that would be this 70 years ago. So the Sabians, the Sabiyun, and this term Sabi is very important. And this is in pre-Islamic Arabia. So the Quran says that the Mushrikun are destined for damnation, right? Which is in stark contrast to the Sabiyun, the Jews, and the Christians who are presented as candidates for salvation. We've already discussed this contradiction. However, the Jews, the Christians, and the Sabians must fulfill their religious duties, and then they can be saved. They can earn salvation. Of course, we know that later on, the Jews and Christians are not going to go find salvation because they are the Mushrikun. But there are these dichotomies in the Quran, these contradictions as to the status of Jews and Christians, for instance.
Can I just say that it's a contradiction within the Islamic narrative?
Yes.
The Islamic narrative states that Nazarenes are Christians, because actually it's not about Sabiyun Jews and Christians, but Sabiyun Jews and Nazarenes.
Yeah, now certainly, but we're looking at the so we'll weave between these, but yeah, this is what what this story is stating. Yeah, that within the standard narrative. All right, so 262. Those who have believed, along with Jews, Christians, and the Sabians, will have their recompense with the Lord, and they shall have no fear and will not grieve. So, in other words, if you're Jew, Christian, or Sabian, you're all good to go. 569. This verse, almost identical to 262, emphasizes the importance of faith and action. In other words, as long as you abide by the rules as laid down, you will find salvation. Then 22:17, the Sabians are mentioned along the Jews, the Christians, the Zoroastrians, and the believers, who are the Muslims here, indicating that Allah will separate between them on the day of resurrection. It implies that the Sabians, along with others, are recognized for the possibility of salvation. So there was a theological position that the Sabians, Jews, and Christians have a favorable position regarding their salvation compared to the Mushrikun or the polytheists who are destined for damnation. Later on, that story apparently changes. So we have a theological and an historical change where Jews and Christians are not destined for salvation, but also, and like the Mushrikun, destined for damnation. So something changed. Any last comment before I move on?
The same. It's not about Christians, but it's about Nazarenes. So what we are talking about here is the incoherences within the Islamic narrative. The literal Quranic text is much more clearer than the Islamic narrative.
Right. Okay, so this is a paper by Francois de Bois, and he was a French scholar, right, Odon?
I think so, yeah. I've read some stuff from him in Edouard Marigalet's thesis.
Yeah, so this is 400 pages long. I'm only going to do 300, so only 75%, so it won't take very long. Right, so it's 7 pages long maximum, I think. We're just going to do a few snippets, some snippets out of it. So he writes here of the Sabians in pre-Islamic Arabia, and he says a religious community called the Sabiyun is mentioned 3 times in the Quran. And those who believed, evidently meaning the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, and the Sabians, all of whom they fulfilled their religious duties, right, were at some time in the past candidates for salvation. And these are in contrast to the polytheists, the associators or mushrikun, who are going to hell. However, he says here, it is no way explicitly stated that the Sabiyun are people of the book. It is not explicit within the Quran, the al-Kitab. This designation is expressly applied only to the Jews and the Christians. So you've got this odd grouping of the Sabiyun who are added later. Now, do note that at least within the Hadith, within the traditions of Islam, Muhammad is one of the Sabiyun. He is a Sabi. I've already shown that. I've already discussed that multiple times in a part of this talk. So Muhammad is one of the Sabiyun. So would that be a reason for including the Sabiyun as people of the book? I mean, that's just a question that we can have. Any thought on that before I move on?
And I would refer the audience to the Jews and Nazarene presentations we had together. We established that originally, literally, the people of the book are Jews plus Nazarenes. And we also established that the Islamic narrative turned this into a soup, another soup, by mixing together people with completely different beliefs So it sort of become what do you call this, a motley crew, a bizarre, very odd category. People of the book actually doesn't mean anything within the Islamic narrative. What is actually the common trait between Jews and Christians, who are supposed to hate each other, Muslims who are supposed to hate all non-Muslims, Sabians, Mazdians, Magis? It's completely heterogeneous. It's very,
Yeah.
very strange that they had to come up with this.
Yeah, no, odd. So, generally speaking, Quranic commentators like the Tafsir claim that salvation was for the Jews and Christians before the coming of Muhammad. After the coming of Muhammad, only Islam is valid, and therefore no longer will you find salvation. All right, so now it says here that the Sabiyun are mentioned together with the Jews and the Christians, and Muslim interpreters are led to the conclusion that the Sabiyun are al-Kitab because of the association within the text. And this is where the commentators came to this conclusion. It's not explicit in the Quran itself. So they had a more or less...
A point, Lloyd, is very interesting here. We understand how the Islamic narrative was made, or at least one of its process. There were commentators who didn't know anything about the actual history of Islam. They read the Quran and they tried to make sense out of it. So they read in the Quran that there are some people who are Ahl al-Kitab, people of the scripture or the book.
Mm-hmm.
And they were wondering, but who the heck are they? So they are trying to understand by reading the Quran. They see this description of Jews and Nazarenes or Christians and Sabians. And so they come up with the idea that there must be the Ahl al-Kitab. But they don't know about it. They're actually inventing meanings to the text. And it tells us a lot about Islam and Muslims. That's the damnation of Muslims is that their religion is supposed to be everything for them, but actually they don't know Islam history. And they have to invent stories to make up for the void.
And I think we'll see some of that here because there's some oddities. It's just these oddities. So, and Sergeant Grinch says these sessions contain so much information. It is a semester of college in 2 hours. Well, thank you very much. I think that refers more to Odon than myself. You know,
come on, Lloyd, you've done your part.
But thank you. Yeah. So, okay. Now he says because the Sabiyun apparently more or less had a monotheistic faith and a book that had been given to them by a genuine God-sent prophet. Now that's the narrative, the standard narrative. We'll examine this as we go. So I am not going to read, obviously, the entire paper. I'll just highlight certain sections. And then, of course, you can download this. It's publicly available. I'll make a link available later. And also, by the way, Odon's socials are in the title. You can click on that to go to his channel. And also in the description, you'll find his web address, his X and YouTube address as well. All right. So they discuss here, right? As for those who have believed and so on, Quran 22:17. Those who have professed Judaism and the Sabiyun and the Christians and the Majus, the Zoroastrians, right? God shall separate between them. So blah, blah. Now the true believers are the Muslims. And you have this now, what we say, familiar triad of Jews, Sabians, and Christians. And two additional faiths are mentioned, Zoroastrians and the polytheists. Now I do find it strange today that Muslims, including Shabir Ali, have been having talks with yes. Zoroaster actually was a Muslim because there's nothing controversial about Allah going to Zoroaster and giving him revelation and him receiving it and presenting it in the context of his culture and time. And so yes, he was a Muslim, which is very odd. Now Muslims say this. They'll say that Zoroaster was a Muslim, which makes Buddha a Muslim as well because he only worshipped one God. But what I want to show is here, you might see that this idea, this cultural idea, goes all the way back to the period that we're looking at right now. This concept of the Borg absorbing these ideas and making this claim is not new. It actually goes way back. Right? But however, Here they're rejecting them. Now the Muslims are doing the exact opposite. Right, sorry, now they're accepting them, but then the Muslims rejected them. So now they're doing the inverse of that. They're doing whatever is convenient for them. So two further faiths, the Zoroastrians and the polytheists, and to these is held up no longer the general possibility of salvation, but only the prospect that Allah will distinguish between them and they will be damned. Right? Any comment before I move on? Odon?
The literal text of the Quran is much clearer than the Islamic narrative, but we already know about this. I'm a bit disappointed by François de Blois, since he doesn't make the difference between Christian and Nazarene, and someone as knowledgeable as him should have known that Nazarene, even though Nazarene even though we might take the Islamic narrative for granted, it's written Nazarene, not Christian.
He gets to this. Look, he discusses, we'll get to that, where he shows a distinction. There's something odd there he brings up. But the terminology, sure, you can argue a little. But and then again, I mean, everyone says, Patricia Crone really was a low IQ individual who should really have stayed in the kitchen and baked cookies, So you get that as well. I mean, everyone's going to find a problem with every author that didn't do something the way they liked it,
And also, Lloyd, what you just said points to the deep nature of Islam. They have a text. They don't understand the text. So they make up theories. They make up the theory of the idea, the completely artificial idea of pure monotheism without nothing.
Right.
And because of this idea, they reread their text, they reinterpret it, and their reinterpretation contradicts the original text. You see,
Yes.
the Zoroastrians are supposed to be saved. The Sabians are supposed to be saved, according to the Quran. They are supposed to be with the good guys. And because of their reinterpretation, they come up with a mad theory that contradicts the text. That says that they are kuffar, infidels, and so they should burn in hell.
Yeah. So it doesn't make any sense. There's no consistency. So hopefully this is Odon. I mean, hopefully it's not rehashing old ideas or beating a dead horse, but also just an exploration of the history, just highlighting all of the inconsistencies, the issues. And one of the things I want to highlight are different scholarly perspectives, right? So you're looking at different perspectives over time, over hundreds of years, as well as from different academic points of view, different scholars' points of view, and the value that each one brings. And just to highlight this and show people, look, there's an inconsistency across all of this. And hopefully with your work, we're starting to bring a thread of consistency into the discussion. And we're looking at the branches. We can now attach these deviations to a certain branch, and you can now get a clearer picture. So these three passages in the Quran, right, represent the sum total of what we know about the Sabiyun. Now, you've got scholars that disagree concerning the question of to whom the name Sabiyun belongs. And the author proceeds to quote 9 more or less different suggestions. This is not different to how Muslim scholars wrote about St. Paul. Remember, St. Paul was alive in the 500s, talking to church leaders of the day and creating false religions in the 400s, the 500s, the 600s, the 300s. He was the son of the king of Emperor Constantine. And Muslim scholars, it's a riot how many conflicting odd theories they've come up with. So even Muslim scholars had no idea. So 9 separate theories of who the Sabiyun are, which again accords with your statements, Odon. So they said one source says that that they are between the Majus and the Jews. In other words, they're a blend of Zoroastrianism and Jews. Now, another idea that I will attach later is that there's the potential for, and this is based on what Kroner said, that certain Jews started to adopt certain pagan ideas. They became syncretists. They started to blend certain ideas in with their Judaism. Another, that they recite the Psalms. In other words, they've adopted some Christian practices or Christian camouflage. So it doesn't mean they were Christians. It means they had certain camouflage or certain practices that they've adopted into their religion. Only 2 of the authorities offer any sort of geographic location. It must be clear that 300 years after the time of Muhammad, nobody knew who the Sabiyun in the Quran were. And the question of their identity had become one of speculation.
Speculation, yeah.
Any comment before I go into the next section?
Now, it just synthesized Islam and Islamic scholarship. Islam scholar don't know what the text mean, and so they engage in speculation, theological speculation, narrative speculation, inventing stories, building layers and upon layers of invention.
Yes, I fully agree. And also, J. Coleman Kane says looks almost as if the Quran was built in two different periods, and I would tend to agree. And it was built late. We'll
At
see
least
here.
At
Yeah,
least,
and I would
and
say
not
at least
Mecca and Medina periods.
correct. And I would say in multiple geographies as well. I'd say you have different time periods and different geographies. And what Du Bois hints at here is that he doesn't say it, but he certainly hints at it. You can easily draw the conclusion that the Quran is being edited in the 11th century, that changes are being made late. So, oh, by the way, I want to mention, so J. Coleman Kane is the author. He's now published his second work on Islam, and he's working on some new stuff. We gave the links to his work on Amazon. Look him up on Amazon. So I'd like to maybe have us meet in a couple of weeks, Odon, and discuss, because he's got some interesting theories as a fiction author who's hard at work on Islam and exposing Islam through fiction, of how the fictional narrative was created and the historical sources they drew from, which is actually really compelling, I think. So, okay. So during the 10th and 11th centuries, the name Sabiyun is most frequently used. Okay. So during the 10th and 11th centuries, the term Sabiyun is used frequently in a meaning that is not mentioned by Al-Tabari. So now you had Al-Tabari, the great historian of Islam, who wrote the 40 volumes of Islamic history. And here you've got scholars that just a short while later, 500 years after Islam, are starting to make up a different narrative, which goes against the existing narrative. Namely, it's a designation for a community that existed in the town of Haran. And we come back to Haran for some odd reason. On the upper Euphrates, in which, judging from the fairly extensive reports by authors such as Al-Masudi and An-Nadim, they worshipped a variety of astral deities. In other words, planets. These were astrological deities. So the moon, the sun, the planets. The epithet is most frequently applied to its members by Muslim authors as star worshippers. Less commonly, the name Sabi is used, and within the tradition, Muhammad is a Sabi. The Muslims try to turn it into something that says the man who created a new religion. That's how the standard narrative tries to reinvent the word or create a new meaning for the word Sabi. But the Sabi are well known historically to be worshippers of the moon god Shin, the Babylonian moon god, in the format of the Yemeni version of this astrological pantheon and this astrological religion. Your thoughts on this, Odon?
Well, it's a bit beyond my scope. I don't know a lot about Sabiyuns. The only thing I know is that when Christianity and Christian ideas came, a pagan, actual paganism could not resist. And what seems to be paganism, star worshippers or anything like this in the 7th century, they can only be pagan that had been influenced by Christian ideas, the idea of salvation.
I'd agree.
Only.
Yeah, definitely.
So they are not pagan from the very ancient time. They are not the same as the star worshippers from before Jesus Christ.
Yeah, there's a story if you read within the Islamic history, I covered this in monotheism. When the Muslims conquered that northern Syria, southern Turkey area, because Haran is just over the border in Turkey, just about 20 kilometers into 15, 20 kilometers into Turkey, there was a major, they had a grand mosque there. The grand mosque had formerly been a temple created by Nabonidus that was run by his sister or his mother, who was the grand priestess. And this was worship of the moon god Shin, and also known as Al-Makkah. And So this was an astral religion, as they discuss here. But the Sufis claim that there they found a treasure trove of the ancient mystery religion. Especially, they found the books that related to the secrets of the Egyptian mystery religion. And they took those books, they claim, to Spain. And this happened in the 7th to 9th. They took them to Spain in the 9th century. That's what they say. So that's just something, that's a loose strand that I haven't really followed up. But this practice was present there before they converted it into a mosque. It was a temple of worship and magic, temple of the occult, and it was turned into the Grand Mosque. It was a university of magic to the moon god Shin. So it practiced Babylonian/Egyptian occultism, apparently. So Tabari does list an opinion according to which the Sabiyun are a community, right, who are monotheists, but who have no religious practice, no book, and no prophet. This contradicts the Quran now again. So this can hardly refer, as Margoliouth and others have thought, to the Sabians of Haran, for these are consistently described as polytheists. Great. So now we have polytheists. So, okay, Haran is a long way from Mosul. I've been in Mosul. It would seem likely that the reference is to some Kurdish sect, perhaps even the ancestors of the Yazidis. Okay, so now you've got this. So now suddenly the story just changes again, right? So more confusion. And then you get what they call the Harnania, right? Harnania. And Sabi was understood to be a synonym for the Harnani or the Harani already in the second half of the 9th century. So now you've got the Harani, and you'll find soon the word Hanif will be connected to this. And that concept came from Haran. So now you've got two strands. We've now got to try to find how do we reconcile between these Haranians, with the two conflicting descriptions that we now have. But just keep that in mind. So these are not necessarily things that we have definitive answers to, but it does raise interesting questions of things that we need to further examine. So by extension, okay, Harani and Hanani, so the Haranians, the Hananiya, which becomes the Hanafiya as well, is a general term for pagans or polytheists, what the Quran will call mushrik. So now you've got, so if they were moon worshippers, and we know that they were moon worshippers, then we know they were polytheists. However, we'll get to how they became monotheists. We'll discuss that in a moment. So Christian Arabic authors use it as a synonym for Hanif, which in Christian usage has the same negative meaning as the Syriac Hanta, or pagan. So the well-informed Muslim writer Al-Masudi, when he says that the Roman emperors before their conversion to Christianity had belonged to the religion of the Asabiyuna al-Musammauna bil-Hunafa. So now you've got the Roman religion, which is, so basically the Babylonian religion, these are all the same astral religions. Don't forget, you've got Mercury, who's the same as Hermes, who is the same as the Egyptian god, who's the same as like Hermes Trismegistus, who is the same as Al-Makkah in Yemen, who is exactly the same god as Shin in Babylon. Same pantheon, just different name in different region. Your comments, Odon, before I go on. There's a lot to take in. I know it's a lot.
Now, I'm sticking with the literal text of the Quran. And the literal text of the Quran doesn't speak about pagans or polytheists. It speaks about Mushrikun. And Mushrikun means, in Murad's English translation of the Quran, he has an interesting way of putting it. He called the Mushrikun the partnering ones. The one who partner. I think it's what this is about.
Right. Well, though we could be looking at here as the development of the standard narrative of how they went down one road, realized they made a mistake, had to come back and then make up another story. And then the fragments of these stories, even though they've given up on one story, they've adopted a new one, the fragments still remain. There's still baggage from these different stories. But hopefully this gives us some idea about the construction of the fabrications of the adventures they went on before they came up with the current story. But it also tells us that the standard narrative has been constantly changing. It's not a static phenomenon. So Al-Masudi says that the ancient Persians, before the time of Zoroaster, had followed the religion of al-Hunafa, okay, of the Sabiyun. Now notice, who was Hunafa? Abraham. Abraham is one of the Sabians, and the Jews say that. And we know that Abraham was a moon worshipper. So now you've got Hunafa, Sabiyun, moon worshippers, right, who are supposedly somehow also monotheists. So yeah, none of that makes any sense. At least the Islamic narrative. Sorry?
It sort of relates to the Quran. In the Quran, there are many occurrences of the same story of Abraham destroying the idols of his forefathers and his father. It's something it seems to be very important for the Quran authors to picture Abraham as leaving polytheism to embracing monotheism. So maybe it has to do with the idea that he was a Sabian, so a sort of pagan.
Yeah. So, but it seems the only. Yeah, but their criteria are very broad. Do you believe in one God? Yes, then you're a Christian. Okay, my one God I believe in is Zeus. You're a Christian. You believe in one God, Zeus. You're a Christian, buddy. I understand. It's an irrational criteria. It makes little sense. So they have these except, and of course we can infer from that the idea of one God. They believe there is only one creator God, and no matter what name you give it, it's the same deity. That's this belief that they have. So you might understand then that they have this. It's a false idea, but that may be the idea that they have, that they're worshiping the one God of the Bible. Does that make sense, Odon?
It could be.
So the ancient Persians, before the time of Zoroaster, had followed the religion of Al-Hunafa, of the Sabiyun. So Al-Masudi must have been aware of the fact that he's using the word Sabi and Hanif in a sense entirely different from their meaning in the Quran. So the narrative has already shifted to challenge and contradict the Quran by major scholars. The implication of his statement is not that in the Quran Sabi and Hanif are synonyms, but only that in the very different sort of Arabic that was used by the intellectuals of the 10th century, both words could mean heathen. And that's what the Jews were saying. So, and the Muslims were claiming the opposite. They were saying when the Jews were saying, but you guys are, the Hanafites, you guys are the heathens, the pagans, the heretics. The Muslims turned it around and said, no, we are. These words mean we are the believers, we are the right ones, you guys are the wrong ones. So they took the terms on. They took the slurs that were used against them, or the words that were used against them to mock them as heretics. They accepted them and they reinterpreted those as, no, we are the believers. And then they said, no, you guys are the heretics. So projection. So a bit of text here. A fair number, both of Muslims and of Christian authors, have denied that the star worshippers of Haran were the Sabiyun of the Quran. The fullest and most colorful version of the story of the usurpation of this name is quoted by the Fikrist of An-Nadim. So supposedly by a Christian, Abu Yusuf Isu al-Katiyan Nasrani, Christian, in a work with a characteristic title of blah, 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 blah. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Briefly, when the Caliph Al-Mamun was passing through the Diyar Mudar during the last years of his reign, not long before the year 833, on his way to make war against the Byzantines, he noticed there was something peculiar about the men of Haran. They had long hair, and he inquired about their religion. And they said, we are Harnaniya. Are you Christians? He asked. He said, no. Are you Jews? He asked. They said, no. Are you Majus? They said, no. That's Zoroastrians. Do you have a book or a prophet? And the Haranians stammered in reply. The Caliph set an ultimatum. By the time of his return from the campaign, the Haranians were either going to convert to Islam or accept one of the other religions mentioned in the Quran, or else they would be put to the sword. Some of them became Muslims, others Christians. Others, however, would not abandon their ancestral faith and took advice from a local Muslim faqih who, after accepting a bribe suggested to them that when Mamun returned, they should tell him that they were Sabiyun, because this is the name of a religion which Allah mentioned in the Quran. The story goes on to say that Mamun died during his campaign and he never returned. But the pagans of Iran have continued to call themselves Sabiyun until today. We have, of course, no way of knowing whether the story is true or accurate in all of its details. Okay, so that gives us some idea as to potential confusion that happened with the Sabiyun, and also tells you if this happened in the 800s, then this must have made its way into the Quran well after the Quran was supposedly established. Wouldn't you agree, Odon?
Yeah, I agree. There's something we haven't said yet, and it's stating the obvious. The word Sabiyun. Sabiyun, if you just look at it, it refers to the kingdom of Sheba in Yemen and Ethiopia. So a Sabian is a Shebian, or maybe it's not the right English pronunciation, but you know what I mean. It's between Yemen and Ethiopia, and it could very simply, Sabian could very simply refer to Jews or Christians from these territories that came in contact with believers.
As a geographical connotation, as a geographical
a geographical connotation. And if you look at these territories, they were Christianized for Ethiopia and also for Yemen, and strongly Judaized for Yemen.
Okay.
So well, they were sort of close to the definition of the people of the book, according to the Islamic narrative. So there might be connection there.
It should be noted, I did discuss this previously in one of the previous episodes, that the Quran distinguishes between the Sabiyun. There's the Sabi, but it doesn't necessarily make it clear whether it's the Sabaeans or the Sabians. The Sabaeans are people from Sheba, the Yemenis, the moon worshippers, right?
It's always the issue with the
Babylonian religion, or the Haranians, because they're two separate groups. They're similar, but they're also different. And the Quran doesn't quite make it clear. And even the rest of the Quranic, of the Muslim sources, don't quite make it clear. It seems to lean towards Haran, generally, in my analysis, but it doesn't always make it clear when they say Sabiyun, whether they mean the people from Yemen or the people from Turkey. It's very confusing. It's not at all clear or distinct. You know,
that's always the issue with the Quran. It's never clear. It's never clear.
Yeah. So he says this reflects a true historical situation. We can infer it refers to a historical situation, namely in the Abbasid period, no one had any idea who the Quranic Sabians really were, and that the name was up for grabs. And it was a name which in fact shielded the Haranians from persecution for the next 200 years. So there's some truth to the rumor. Where there's smoke, there's a little bit of fire, right? So the story of the usurpation or the theft of the name or the using of the name by the Haranians was known also to Hamza al-Isfahani, which would make him a Persian, who tells us in his history that the pagans of Western Asia used to be called Chaldeans or Kaldaniyun, and their remnants today are in the towns of Haran and Edessa. Okay, don't forget, Abraham supposedly came from that region of the world. Right, he stayed there, and in fact, his grandfathers lived there, and there's still towns named after Abraham's grandfathers in and around Haran in Turkey. But they ceased to use this name for themselves since the days of Al-Mamun. So they no longer called themselves Kaldaniyun, and they changed to protect themselves from Islam. They called themselves Sabiyun for reasons that would take too long to explain. Okay, and then the last section. Okay, a couple of points here. Hamza writes that the pagans used to be called Chaldeans, but in the time of Islamic dominion, they called themselves Sabiyuns. Then he goes on to say a couple of interesting things. But the real Sabians, okay, the Sabiyun, al-Sabiyuna fi al-Hakika, which is really interesting. The Hakika is the highest level of understanding. It's the mystical understanding of the Quran. Remember, the Quran is divided into 4 levels, or Islam has 4 levels and 2 divisions, right? So you've got these 4 levels, and the Hakika is the highest level of understanding, the mystical level of understanding, open only to the greatest scholars, who are the Sufis. So Now you've got this mystical understanding, this magical understanding, open only to the greatest scholars. And the Sufis, as I mentioned in the past, and I covered in monotheism in my series Monotheism, that there they found certain magic, the secrets of the Egyptian mystery schools. Do you understand a little odd connection here, Odon?
Yeah, I get it.
And they're a sect of, sorry?
It's always the same story that keeps on unraveling itself. The same process of invention, building upon invention. So the name Sabiun is here for the taking. Let's take it and invent new stories and so on.
Right. So
this process.
So they're a sect of Christians who lived in, remember, if they can claim to be Muslims, they can claim to be Christians as well. What stops them? So they're a sect of Christians who lived in the region between the cultivated land and the swamp. They differ from the general mass of Christians and are reckoned by the Christians to be heretics. Interesting. Now remember, Muhammad claimed to be a Sabi as well. And that is in the traditions, in the Muslim traditions. He's a Sabi. He's one of these people. Among Orientalists, there's for some time been a virtual consensus that the real Sabians, the Sabians of the Quran, are in fact the Mandaeans, the well-known Gnostic sect which has survived to the present day on both sides of the Iraq-Iran border in the marshlands of the Tigris and Euphrates. Mm-hmm. And that is the common understanding. And the Mandaeans are Gnostics. So let me just finish that. Let me just go over here. Let me see if I have anything. The Mandaeans are baptizers. So they believe that they hate St. Paul. They follow John the Baptist and so on. So there's certain Christian aspects that they completely reject. They believe he was evil. And then, of course, they follow John the Baptist and they baptizes. And yeah, that's a long discussion for another time, right? And
this comes there is a connection to be made here. As I put it in my book, there is a tradition about Muhammad having baptized Umar ibn al-Khattab when Umar converted to Islam. So the question is, was Muhammad a Christian or a Mandaean? And if he was a Mandaean, then he could have been also a Sabi, because Sabi are Mandaeans, as you just put it.
Yeah. So does that make more sense now, where this is all going? I mean, it's all over the place, but look, we're seeing it. But remember, this happened over centuries. We're seeing it in fast motion. This happened in slow motion in different times and places. Our job is to maybe try to organize it in the end. Okay. Last couple of points. So, last couple of points here that I'll bring up before we move on. As soon as that loads. So the name Majus, which we can find in Quran 22:17, can hardly refer to anyone else. Okay, so here we're talking about Zoroastrians, right? Zoroastrians. It is, of course, a borrowing from Musa, the usual Syriac name for the Zoroastrians. Even the Mandaean name, even the Sabiun, there's an Aramaic connection as well. That I didn't read it, but it was in the above the notes. And as is known from the time of the Prophet, the Sasanians, who were precursors to the Persians, controlled not only the whole of both coasts of the Persian Gulf, but Yemen as well. So they controlled all of Yemen. They eventually controlled that region. They conquered it. So now you've got the Iranians in there. And there is finally one other religion which was evidently represented not only in Arabia, but amongst the Prophet's own people, his family, the Quraysh, namely Manichaeism. Now, one day I need to have a talk about the Manichaeism, the parallel with Islam. And that's going to be fascinating. Not wanting to upset people, but one day I will also have a talk about the parallels with Manichaeism, which is the religion, the Gnostic religion of the Prophet Mani from, I think, the 4th century, which was born out of the Alchazai, which is also very much, these teachings and ideas are also very much present in the theology of a man called Martin Luther. And if you've watched this channel often, not to upset you, but I'm going to talk about this, and I have spoken about this in the past, just to be straight up. Yeah, Martin Luther has a little bit too much Manichaean Gnosticism in his theology, as does a man called John Calvin. And I will go back to that. I need to finish my Martin Luther series because there's... Okay, moving on. Right, and so the final section here. So isn't that interesting, Odon? Isn't that just a couple of interesting oddities there, historically? Because now you've got
Very,
Gnostics.
very interesting. Very interesting. And it gives you the occasion for your Luther moment, so it's perfect.
No, not about that. It's just, look, I'm just following the evidence. I'm just presenting what factual evidence I can find. The audience can decide. But just for those who know, I'm not here to particularly upset anyone. I'm just trying to present this is evidence I have because I bought the entire Luther series. I bought his entire Luther's works. I own it now, and thanks to the audience who funded me, we bought the entire series. I've read it. I spent several years working on Luther, and what I found was unpleasant, to say the least. So, but in terms of finding the whole Mandean connections, the Sabiun connections, I mean, doesn't that add a little bit of flavor to the whole Islamic discussion as to influences and influences in Islam that aren't discussed enough, historical aspects that are not considered and are often rejected.
Ingredients for the soup.
Yep.
The thing with a recipe is you have to know the proportion. How much carrots, how much potatoes, how much leek you put in the soup. So how much Christianity, how much Judaity, how much Sabiity you put in Islamic, you put it in the soup in order to make Islam.
Yeah, no. So, so the moon, it's odd. You have these astrological references in the Quran. You have Qamar, the moon, these chapters, and you have Yasin. Sin was the name of the Babylonian moon god, the Yemeni version. That was his Yemeni name. I mean, his Yemeni name was Makkah. I know of a place called Makkah somewhere in Saudi Arabia. You may have all have heard of it. So yeah, there's all these oddities. The Quran is easy to understand. Of course, we all know that. So before Islam, Christianity was represented amongst the tribes of Rabia, Tassan, and some of the Quda. Judaism was among the Himyar, Banu Kinana, Banu Harik, and Kinda. Kinda is Yemen. The whole of Yemen at one point was a Jewish kingdom. Whether it was Orthodox Judaism or some weird strand, but that's a different discussion. And Zoroastrianism. But however, these religions were, according to this history, common across Arabia and across the regions where Muhammad was. He didn't have to travel anywhere. They were there where he was. So you've got all of these influences, and one has to wonder. And then the last point I will make today on this paper, the Quraysh had their Manichaeanism from Al-Hira. Hira, is that where the cave of Hira was, or is that from a different location?
No,
so the Quraysh
Hira is it's near Kufa.
Okay, then we're looking at...
So it was a center for Arab Christianity. So it's it's in between Arabia and Mesopotamia.
Okay,
it's
that
a place
would make
where Ali ibn Talib he was supposed to be the sort of governor. Okay. This was the high place of the what's the name? Lahmid Arabs.
So Najaf. It's now called Najaf. So let's have a look. My browser is not supported. Okay, so we're talking basically this is in Iraq.
Yeah.
So so that's Al-Hira in Iraq. So they took their Manichaeism from Al-Hira. The Quraysh went to Al-Hira on their trading missions and met the Christians, and the Christians instructed them. But here they're calling them Christians, but they're not Christians. They're Manichaeans. The Manichaeans were claiming to be Christians, or the Muslims confused them with Christians. But these are Gnostics. But they get called Christians. They learned Azandaka from the Christians of Al-Hira. Christians must mean Christian converts to Manichaeism. Nestorian Christianity was the dominant faith amongst the population of Hira, and it is only to be expected that Manichaeans there would have had a Christian background or even masqueraded as Christians. Your thoughts? That's the final excerpt from this paper that I'll play here today.
That's the thing with this Eastern Christianity, that we don't know much about it. But there was this official Christianity, so Nestorianism, which was a state religion in the Persian Empire, and it was easier for the heretics, the one who mingled with Manichaeism, Gnosis, and so on, to meddle and mix with the nomads and the Arabs. So that's how the Arabs were seen at the time. They had been Christianized, but still the people knew that they had kept their old customs and that there were many heretics with them, many strange people with strange religions and strange ideas. So the soup had a sort of a very odd taste.
So who they refer to as Christians, they're not necessarily remotely even Christians. So they use the term a little loosely because they worship one God. It's very broad criteria and clearly not a viable criteria. So I just wanted to, can you understand, as the audience, hopefully you can see the incoherence, but you can see how this story just morphs and evolves and changes. And if the Muslims have made a mistake, they've got to go back, change the narrative to fix it. And once you look at the history, you just see a complete and utter mess. Okay, so moving on. Any final word before I go on to syncretism? So this, I'll go back to the slides.
I just said my final words.
Okay, great. Yeah, but hopefully, was that instructive? I mean, do you think that was of use and instructive, that adds something to the conversation or the knowledge of the audience and the discussion around this?
Yeah, for sure. It's very, very instructive. But I don't completely agree with you when you say that the Christian denomination sort of didn't mean anything for them.
No, I think they accepted that.
I think they were largely Christians. Their leaders were Christians. The king of all the Arabs had been baptized in the end of the 6th century. But they meddled with other creeds and stuff. And so...
and they still called them Christians. I mean, the criteria was a bit loose for what was a Christian.
Yeah, maybe the most useful criteria is you bow to a Christian king. So you're supposed to acknowledge his face, and in this time when your leader was from a certain religion, you were supposed to embrace that religion, even though in your heart or when the king wasn't there, you might do something else.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So now to talk about syncretism, and so inclusiveness versus contradiction. Right. So syncretism really is trying to include things that are contradictory. So syncretism is a philosophy that blends or merges contradictory ideas. Often they will hide this contradiction behind terms like, well, it's a complex issue. There's a nuanced understanding. You'll find AIs do this all the time. It's just moral relativism. It's just relativism. Instead of finding contradictions, instead of using basic Aristotelian contradictory logic or non-contradictory logic, what they try to do is they try to relativize and equalize things that are clearly opposite and contradictory. So because why? We don't want to be exclusive. We must be inclusive. So this philosophy has affected and infected academia and our language. But it's been going on for a long time. So this results in the merging of good and evil, making it harder to distinguish between the two, or even eliminating evil as a distinct concept. I don't think that's really a controversial thing to say. So the scholastic philosophical approach focuses on logical analysis and reasoning to understand complex concepts, including contradictories. So it aims to discern and to differentiate between ideas and concepts like good and evil, to discriminate. Of course, in the modern day and age, you're not allowed to discriminate. That's bad. You can't make distinctions because everything is the same, because men are women these days. So hopefully that sort of gives you a clear idea of the fact that this is actually in your face these days. So, any comment before I move on to the next slide?
You can say you can say nowadays that everything is the same, but the only thing that is not the same is the truth. The actual truth is not the same. It is the only concept in this relativism and syncretism that is condemned.
Yeah, 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 because it
So
destroys the narrative.
it's not actual syncretism. It's not the merging of good and evil. Actually, it's the merging of every evil and everything good, everything that is 100% good is seen as evil.
Yeah. No, yeah, they call it inclusiveness, but really, ultimately, the evil starts to overwhelm. It's like an infection. It's like an
Just have
infection.
an anecdote, an interesting anecdote for your non-French audience. Last weekend, last Saturday, I think, there was a sort of huge party in the city of Toulouse in France, where the mayor and various associations had organized a sort of grand défilé, not a pride, but there were huge moving statues, animatronics, robot statues in the shape of Lilith, you know, the Mesopotamian goddess Lilith,
Lilith.
demon, and other demon-like figures, but huge statues, 10 or 15 meters high. And they openly said that they had opened the doors to hell and so on. And they openly admitted it was something demonic or satanic. And the people were supposed to rejoice, but never would the organizer have accepted that among all these statues and these robots, that there could have been a Christian statue, for example. A robot of I don't know, the Virgin Mary,
Wow.
for example. So you see these statues of demons are supposed to be good, and the people that kind of worshipped them at the moment were tolerant and so on, but they were tolerant, but they were intolerant to anything that was Christian, actually.
Agreed. Now that is scary.
Very
But
weird, and it really fits your description of the merging of good and evil. When you merge good and evil, the good get absorbed, and there is no good anymore. The merging of good and evil amounts to evil.
yeah, so evil is eliminated as a distinct concept, because that would be, because how can you exclude these people? Because inclusion is, do you understand? It's really it's it's just evil coming in by the back door, or evil just walking in the front door these days. So yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that explains. So let's have a look at a more modern phenomenon that parallels Islam. Let's have a look at this. Santeria, you known as voodoo. So syncretism and moral relativism. So let's look how these concepts align. So background. So Santeria originated in Cuba in the 19th century. It blended African Yoruba religion, right? So you had this pantheon, they had a pantheon of gods, they had divination, just like the Muslims had divination, right? The Arabs had divination, the idea of fate, inshallah, right? Destiny, reincarnation, and communal worship. Sounds kind of similar. Odd where these ideas came from. Third world. Communal worship with a typo, and it blended it with Catholicism, right? So this fusion came from the conversion of enslaved Africans who tried to preserve their traditional beliefs while adapting to the dominant Christian culture. Now, part of what I think I've said here is that you've got Muslims, there are pagan elements within Islam, because you've got these pagan Arabs wanting to integrate with the new monotheistic culture, with the new Christianized culture. However, they also want to preserve the pagan elements of their religion. They don't want to quite get rid of it, so they try to syncretize them. They try to harmonize them, so they retain these ideas while going along with the flow. Does that make a bit of sense, at least logically, Odon?
But I think it has been like this in every former pagan territory that was Christianized. There was a sort of the phenomenon is called inculturation. The Christianity took every ancient pagan belief that was useful for it, but some that were not useful and that were rejected, lived on, and some people tried to mix them with Christianity. You're talking about Santeria in Cuba, but when you see what the Mexicans do with the sort of worship of the dead,
Yeah.
It's kind of the same.
Yeah.
It was an ancient pagan belief that
Aztec
was
beliefs.
mixed with Christianity. With Christianity, it can, okay, and there is the cult of the worship of the saints, and Christianity can do with it. But nowadays, it has become much more than Christianity.
Yeah, Christian. Eventually, it's just Christian camouflage, but not Christianity at all. It's the inverse of it. Eventually, it becomes the inversion, the opposite, with just Christian camouflage at best.
Part of these beliefs can be incorporated within Christianity. I don't know whether it's in Madagascar or in the Eastern Asian Isles. There was a practice among the tribes of unburying the dead, dressing them, and spending a day with them every year. So they unburied the grandfather, the great grandfather. They put him some nice. They put some nice clothes and so on. And when Christianity came, the missionaries were horrified, of course, but the belief and the practice was so strong that they had to do with it. And so the missionaries sort of incorporated this belief into the worship of the saints. And they sort of Christianized this belief. But the danger is here, it's that the ancient pagan belief might have remained. I mean, it might be stronger than the Christian sentiment.
Yeah, right. So that leads to a dilution.
Maybe that was the case with our Arabs in the 7th century. I don't know.
That is always, but I'm just presenting these as possibilities. I don't know if it's possible to make definitive statements, but we can certainly show there's not. I mean, like scholar A can say this is how it is, but to be honest, I don't think that's really honest, because there's going to be room for a little bit of discussion, and there's more evidence to be uncovered. There's more perspectives to pursue, and there's so yeah. I think we're converging. I do think, though, the evidence, more than anything else, is converging. I don't think it's really contradicting. I think it's converging, and I think it is fleshing out the narrative. It's providing additional data. It's providing more information to draw a better, more pieces to the puzzle. Let's put it that way. We have too many pieces to this puzzle, and now we're able to throw away various pieces, and we're able to include the ones that make historical sense or cultural sense, and so on. Okay, so yeah. Okay, let's go on. So yeah, but thanks for that. That really does explain. So let's continue here. So merging of beliefs. In Santeria, African deities known as Orishas are often associated with Catholic saints. For instance, the Orisha Obatala is Puritan wisdom linked to Our Lady of Mercy. While Shango, that's Mary, right? While Shango, the god of thunder, is connected to Saint Barbara. Weird connection, but there it is. Okay, we just have to accept it. This blending creates a framework where both sets of beliefs coexist and are practiced simultaneously. Of course, they contradict, so therefore they have to. But see, from the third world mind, there's no contradiction, because the third world doesn't see that. The Western mind sees that.
It's a funny connection, Shango and Saint Barbara. Barbara is the patron saint of artillery. Artillery.
Barbara was a warrior in the Old Testament, though.
Excuse me.
She was a warrior in the Old Testament.
Yeah, but she became in the French Navy, at least, the patron of gunners. The store in the ship where you stored the powder was called the Sainte Barbara. So
Okay.
she because of this she became related to explosions. And when the sailors came to America, to Cuba, they brought this belief with them, their devotion towards Saint Barbara as being their patron saint. And it's mingled with Shango, the god of thunder. It's very, very, very interesting. The connection is interesting because it is a very late connection. Saint Barbara became the patron saint of artillerymen only very late. She artillery at first to be invented, and naval artillery also.
Yeah. Owen Robertson says the Arabs saw how uniting the Roman Christians were and needed their own Arab religion to call their own. So take the Gospels, canon, and not, and as long. So yeah, maybe they were trying to imitate what the Romans had done by uniting an empire under Christianity, and they competed by taking some of those ideas, incorporating it into the existing culture, and and off you go. So yeah. Okay, so now just long story short, if I remember correctly, because I have read on this some time back, it was a year or two ago, but Barbara in the Old Testament is she's considered highly respected by the Jews. She was there was a fight, the Jews were fighting against some king, and then she was very much involved with that fight, so she's highly respected for that. So there's a link there to Barbara as a woman of war. And now, of course, moral relativism. So the syncretic nature of Santeria can lead to moral relativism because practitioners adopt very flexible interpretations of right and wrong based on both Yoruba and Catholic teachings, which are not compatible. So, for example, rituals that might be considered taboo in Catholicism, let's say, will be justified within the other tradition. So there's a complex, very relativistic moral landscape where actions are evaluated based on context rather than any absolute standards. And I think it's fair to say that this sums up Islam because it is syncretic.
It's an interesting point.
Yeah. So let's continue then. Yeah, Christianity. So Nicodemus says Christianity gets desecrated by anti-Christian pagans for millennia. Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah. So lots of confusion, Lydia. There's lots of confusion today.
I agree.
Just step outside and look for the woman with chest hair and the big beard. You know what I'm saying? Good grief. So syncretism creates belief systems where contrary ideas coexist, meaning that moral discernment is complicated. There's no moral discernment. There's preferences. There's well, in this situation I'll do this, but in that situation I'll do that. But there are no moral absolutes. There are no moral standards, and this sums up Islam accurately. You're looking at syncretism of different ideas, which would explain how it operates. I mean, you nodded your head, Odon. That's great because I'm still waiting for you to fall on me from a dizzy height and crush me by saying, Lloyd, that's amateurish. How can you say something like that? I've been very worried. So, okay. So Lydia stays indoors. Yeah, you're safer indoors, Lydia. Well done. So, guys, look, if you do like this, please remember to like it, share it, subscribe, all of the above. And Odon has many books available. Well, he's got one book available, at least, that you should get. It's available for free, or you can buy a copy on Amazon. So that is The Great Secret of Islam. Link in the description, or you can link to his channel. You'll find his channel as well. And yeah, check the title, the description, get that. And yeah, so.
Just one thing. Actually, I have two channels. I have the Odon Lafontaine channel, my historical channel, my French channel, actually. And I've got the Great Secret of Islam channel, which is supposed to be my English channel.
Okay, great. Yeah, so great. So yeah, well, if you speak French, you know where to go, and if you speak English, you also have a home there. Yeah, in Britain,
Mhm.
the word church is to become a taboo, and community is going to be the new normal, as suggested by the woke Anglican Church. Exactly, community, which is effectively what's that religion? Unitarianism. So it just becomes a social club. So it's got no moral force of any
Mhm.
type. So yeah, Jude says yeah, many Muslims merge their culture with Islam. Yeah. So syncretism. So these are a couple of slides
Mm.
from my discussions on Gnosticism, right? So I'm going to go through a few slides. I'm trying to get to slide 40, but I don't think we'll make it. So the aim was to finish at slide 40 today, or 39. Okay, so syncretism, it's and Gnostic plagiarism. Let's have a look at how this process works. We want to understand the process because Odin has provided how the narrative structure is built and fabricated. I want to go in another discussion on that and give you another perspective. Gnosticism has unique mechanism which appropriates, steals, reuses, repurposes. It's the Borg, the writings of other religions, and it repurposes them, right? It reuses them. So religious trappings and symbols are assimilated into the nonsense Gnosticism mythological system. So, for instance, they've adapted baptism, they've adapted the Eucharist, they've adapted worship services. There's the Gnostic Catholic Church. There are Gnostic priests on YouTube. I have mentioned this before and I haven't done it, and I promised I would. But if you listen to a Gnostic priest give a sermon in a Gnostic church, it'll take you about 5 minutes before you figure out they're not Christians. Because man, it is so hard to tell the difference. You've really got to be paying attention.
Mhm.
The reason it can do this is because of a method called the allegorical hermeneutic. So hermeneutic is the theory and practice of interpretation. And Odon, would you say that Islam, the narrative, is an interpretation?
That's exactly that's the thing. It is the reinterpretation of the Quran, and um, it built upon layers and layers of narratives that were also
So,
interpreted, reinterpreted, changed,
so I
rewritten,
want
and
to
so
show a
on.
real-time example of exactly that. So,
Mhm.
involving the understanding and the uncovering of meaning within text, symbols, and cultural phenomena. So they re-understand it, they reinterpret it, they reuse something, and they will drive you insane with how they do this,
Mhm.
how they reinterpret and steal your ideas. Some scholars have used the term symbiosis rather than syncretism. Symbiosis, however, can be parasitic. It's a parasitic syncretism, so it's not a positive thing. Syncretism is parasitic and ultimately toxic, which goes to the point we were discussing earlier. Now, let's have a look at allegorical hermeneutic, right? And the source here is my YouTube talk, Nonsense, the Fundamentals of Nonsensicism. Okay, it's about Gnosticism. So let's have a look. Some terms. And Mary had a little lamb. You've all grown up with Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow. She sent the lamb to Lloyd's neighborhood, and look how ugly it is now. So something like that. I think that's more or less how the. Anyway, moving on. So difficulties that surround the study of nonsense. Now I'm talking about Gnosticism because we just discussed in De Blois' paper about Manichaeism and Gnosticism. The Mandaeans are Gnostic, the Manichaeans were Gnostic, and so on, and their links to Islam. So this is largely caused by its allegorical hermeneutic because it's not always clear how the believers read their texts. It's not explicitly determined. So how they interpret the text is often a matter of convenience rather than a matter of strict doctrine because there's no non-contradictory logic. So allegory. Allegory is a narrative using symbolic figures and actions to express truths or generalizations. And the Quran, as I think, very general, very symbolic, very woolly and vague. Would you agree, Odon?
Yeah, completely, completely.
Now,
Mhm.
story, play, poem. The Quran tells stories, a mixture of stories, a
Mhm.
whole wide variety of contradictory stories about the Bible, for instance. And works where characters and events symbolize particular qualities. So a character symbolizes a quality. It's not necessarily a real character, a historical figure, but the character is to illustrate a point, to make a moral point or other point. I see you nodding your head, so that's a good thing, Odon. So these ideas are related to morals, religion, or politics. Hidden meanings. Often these interpretations reveal moral or political lessons. They are hidden meanings, so you can write tafsir, which explain the hidden meanings of what's in the text. Then you have the Platonic myth. This uses narrative and allegory to convey philosophical ideas. symbolically and metaphorically. I mention this because the philosophy of Islam, there is a philosophy, and it comes there's a Platonic influence which is rarely acknowledged. Some scholars do know of it, but it's almost never discussed. And I have to at some point also discuss the influence of Platonic, the false Platonism, the false Platonic ideas that they absorbed. And parables. Now, scholars will say there's no real parables in the Quran, right? We have parables in Christianity. Jesus told parables. So a parable is a short story that illustrates a moral lesson, often featuring a character or event that represents abstract concepts or real-world situations for deeper insight. Okay, so now let's look at Mary Had a Little Lamb to show how this allegorical usurpation works within Islam. So Mary Had a Little Lamb as allegory. So Mary Had a Little Lamb is an English language nursery rhyme from 19th century America, first published by American writer Sarah Josepha Hale in 1830. Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. He followed her to school one day. That was against the rule. It made the children laugh and play to see a lamb at school. Odon, please interpret that for me. What does that mean? Just tell me what it says. It's about a lamb, right?
I read one day that it was about Christianity. That the lamb was supposed to be Jesus, Mary was supposed to be Mary, Virgin Mary.
Okay.
But the thing with gnosis and interpretation, when the text is obscure enough, such as the Quran, you can say almost anything you want about it.
Right. Good point. So Gnostic success comes from its method of interpretation. So you can think this poem is about a little girl whose pet lamb followed her to school, but you would be wrong. I am so sorry to inform you. You've been misled all these years. Let me teach you the secret. Yes, Odon?
I'm a bit disappointed. What's the song about?
If you were a student of the mysteries, if you were inducted into the Gnostic mysteries, you would see that Mary is a teacher of Gnosis. The lamb is her willing, submissive student who submits to her. And the fleece is the garment of bad thinking that was washed clean white because the student came to embrace the one true Islam, you see. So he came to understand the deep Gnostic mysteries, and the student then became so attracted to Gnostic teachings that the student, the neophyte, the new Muslim, entered the school, the temple of learning. The secret, you see, because it's telling you need to enter the secret temple of learning, and then you can become one of the elite of this nonsense. And even though it was against the rules and against the cultural norms, those inducted into nonsense realized the true Gnostic is above the rules and laws of the material world, because Allah's law, the Sharia, is better than man-made law. You are above man-made laws and rules. Does that start to make sense so far, Odon?
Yeah.
So this has now been reinterpreted, right? Reality to make a fantasy. Contradictions are all inverted. They change everything. They turn everything upside down.
But I think it's sort of modeled on Christianity. Christianity actually is a sort of mystery religion, religion with mystery.
With mysteries, but it's not a mystery religion.
Levels within Christianity. You can be a catechumen, for example. So you stay, you should stay at the door of the church and not engage in the mystery, in the Eucharist. When you are priest, you get learned in the mysteries, but when you are a bishop, it's something else. You are on a higher level. And when you look at Islam, like you said, there are different level of interpretation for the Quran, with the higher level being the hakika.
Yeah, let me bring that up. Yep.
Actually, it's in Christianity there is mystery, but the mysteries are not hidden. You see, for example, the Gospel of John is traditionally the gospel that was used for the teaching of priests and clerics. That's why it was written. But every Christian can read it and understand it the way priests and clerics do. So the mystery is not hidden. The thing with these new religions that came after Christianity or took from Christianity is that they developed this mystery religion model and turned it into something else, something
Mystery
esoteric.
religion becomes private revelation. Christianity is about public revelation, and you follow that. Whereas private Gnosticism is private revelation, Islam is private revelation. This was someone's idea. Trust me, bro. I
Yeah,
interpret this my way. So it violates
exactly.
Christian.
There is this idea of secrecy, of initiation. You get learned into something. You belong to the very few people who know, and it's a very empowering situation. You become
Right.
part of the elite.
Yep.
There is a sort of exclusivity,
Right.
and this gives you a false feeling of personal salvation.
Superiority, because those are the kafir.
Superiority, exactly. Since you are superior to the others, you are
Yeah.
saved.
Yeah.
This
No.
is how Masonry works, and also Islam.
Yeah.
When you remember the infamous Yassir Qadi interview, where he explained that there are holes in the Islamic narrative regarding the history of the Quran. A short time after this interview, David Wood did a very, very good video on this, because he studied Yassir Qadi's speech during the interview, and he showed everyone how Yassir Qadi explained that there are different levels within Islam, that and this level with this level Islam differentiates between common people, common Muslim people, learned Muslims, clerics, scholars, high scholars, and it's not the same level of understanding. And also Yassir Qadi explained that most common Muslims are manipulated by learned Muslims, who are in turn manipulated by clerics and scholars, who are in turn manipulated also by the higher scholars. You see, there is a sort of power pyramid within Islam, and I think it's the same in every Gnostic religion or movement. And this is also a very strong incentive to join and to sort of progress into the pyramid, because you hope to become better and to have more power over the others, to have more knowledge, to get more more riches, more women, more everything. That's the way it works.
Right. Yeah. So to based on what you've just said about Yasir Qadi speaking of the divisions within Islam, let me just do this. This is from the Sharia. This is from my discussions on the Sharia. There are two divisions in Islam, and there are 4 levels, right? There are 2 divisions and 4 levels. Your 2 divisions are, so you have the Sharia on the one side, which is the legislative. Islam, remember, doesn't have morals. It has laws, right? It doesn't have priests. It has lawyers. You need to understand the distinction. You're thinking in a Christian mindset and a Western mindset. Islam has administrators and lawyers. It has jurists. It has legal practitioners, not priests. It has laws. Laws can be circumvented. Laws have laws that modify those laws. So laws are not fixed, right? You can have exceptions to laws. So there are no morals that are absolutes within Islam. Understand the distinction. So you have the Sharia, which is the one division, so that is the legislative side. Sharia means to obey Allah. So for the Muslim, he has to obey Allah. It is called the Zahir, or the outer, the exoteric, the outer practice, just the doing. You just do this and you'll be fine. You'll find salvation as long as you follow these rules. Step into the bathroom with your left foot, step out of the bathroom with your right foot. Say this prayer when you sit down on the toilet. Okay, you
Orthopraxy.
know, yeah, just do these stuff exactly. It's the outer meaning, outer practice is what is visible. It's what people see. So you do things to be seen. It's the first, also from an understanding level, it's the first plain level of meaning, the obvious level of meaning. But of course, that is interpreted through the scholars. You don't derive that yourself. Then you have the hakika, right? Remember we mentioned the hakika earlier with the Mandeans and the Manichaeans. There was the hakika. The Mandeans were the Manichaeans. No, the Sabi were from the hakika, right? They understood at a high spiritual level. This is for the spiritual. This is the spiritual level. So the spiritual level is one accessed only by the major scholars, your Sufis, your highest level. The hakika is to know Allah. This is purely something the domain of highly trained scholars. It is the batin, or the inner, the esoteric. It is inner, direct, personal knowledge, personal experience of Allah, literally the gnosis of Allah. Personal. I didn't say objective, subjective, personal experience of Allah. Based on occultism, you have to do magical practices. Then you have the four levels, the ibara. So you have the two sides, right? The one side is exclusive to the scholars, and the Sufis are the elite of the scholars. Then you have the ibara, the literal or the zahir, or Islam for the masses, as it's actually termed. You are the legislative subjects if you're a Muslim. You follow the law. Then you have the ishara, what is implied, an allusion, a sign, a gesture. So you see, so you've got levels in the Quran, and certain things are alluded to. They're not clear, they're not direct. And the legislative practitioners understand that level. That's your imams. Then you have the lataif. You mentioned earlier Lilith. Lilith is a demon, right? She, in some Jewish myths, she's the first wife of Adam. She ate babies, so that's why she's the patron saint of, for many women, she's the patron saint of abortion, right? So she ate babies, and then God, of course, sent two angels to bring her back to submission, and she decided to no, and then she refused to come back, and then she gave certain bracelets to be put on the babies to prevent her from eating them. So the angels took these back, and they had to give them to the Jews to put on their child's wrists to save them from death, from Lilith eating them, right? So there's a whole story there. But that lataif is like a plural, or it's one form of the verb latifa, right? And you have the al khadr al laylat, the night of power. So these terms are also related to the word laylat. Laylat is the Arabization of Lilith. Now, according to the Sufis, Allah has an inner form, right? He has the zahir and the batin, the inner, the outer and the inner. His inner form, the inner form of Allah, is, according to the Sufis, apparently female. I know this sounds bizarre, okay? It seems bizarre, but Allah has an external masculine form and an inner female form. And they speak of the Laylat, who is Lilith. So yeah, you put that together however you like. You come up with your own conclusions. Now, the lataif are nuances or subtleties in the message in the Quran, which are only open to advanced spiritual practitioners. And then you have the aqaiq, reality of the truth, the divine essence. The aqaiq, the ultimate reality, the essence of reality, is the spirit of Muhammad, right? The spirit of Muhammad is what reality is made of. And this is only for, again, the Sufis, advanced spiritual practitioners. The two top levels are Sufis only. Just so you know, just to qualify what Yasir Qadi said and some of the other, I know it sounds bizarre, but you need to understand Islam is not what you've been told. You read the scholarly texts and it will blow your mind. Your thoughts on this before I move on, Odon?
Well, now it's nice to put the. I've already listened to one of your presentation about this, but it's you see, when you look at Islam, when you hear someone like Sakadi, you can get the hunch that something like this is going on. But what's always maybe one of the good aspects of Islam is everything has been written down. It's like in every totalitarian movement, they write down their ideology. In the end, you have a sort of a code. Everything has been codified, and thanks to all these scholars, we have the sort of recipe for Islam. It's very, very interesting to have this level of this way of decoding and understanding what Islam actually does.
Yeah, thanks. It just goes over most people's heads though, and they don't want to discuss it. They don't want to deal with it. They just want to equate it to Christianity and then say, well, kind of this equals that, that is that. Let's move on to have another day, another day. And they don't realize Islam is bizarre. Once you dig into, there is so much reference to magic and occultism in Islam. It's not funny, and it's
The thing is, the common Muslims, the one on level 1, the legislative subject, they don't know maybe about the different levels and so on, but they know that there are only common Muslims. They unconsciously know that there are better Muslims than them, learned Muslims. When they have issues, when they have questions, they must take them to the higher levels. So even though the common people doesn't know about this organization, it has a conscious unconsciousness of it.
No. So guys, let's move on. Yeah, let me close this and move on. Right. So I'm not going to make another 6 slides. So let's see how far we get. But this. Okay, so now let's continue with Mary Had a Little Lamb. So it's how it's interpreted. So the other Gnostics, the children who laugh and play, rejoice at the initiation of a new elite member. That's what the children laugh and play at. They're welcoming you. So, if you join us, we will, you can be one of us. You can be part of us, This presents Mary as a Little Lamb using Gnostic allegory as a method of interpretation. So nonsense adapts to any religious context. It can twist anything. In my presentation on this, on my channel, I also discuss Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And we turn that into a complete Gnostic allegory. And it just turns it into a completely bogus, but very compelling sounding religious interpretation using this Gnostic allegory. So a challenge in Gnostic scholarship arises from the practice which involves interpreting the texts, right? And these texts are written often as figurative allegories, which inverts their meaning. So we have to be very careful how we interpret, which is why Odon has been discussing read the text literally. However, we must understand that, and we can see that. Hopefully you'll agree with me. There's one story in the text, but there are numerous figurative interpretations that are equally valid because they clearly have a strong impact on the culture. Would you agree, Odon, that there's other interpretations which heavily impact the culture?
Of course, that can be. The issue here is to know whether the author, so Maria Josepha something, wrote this with this intention, or you see, with Gnosticism and interpretation, you can give meaning to almost everything, and you can interpret a text in any way you want. So it was this voluntarily a Gnostic text, or was it over-interpreted?
Yeah, or was it just what it says? Just a rhyme to teach kids how to read and memorize things. What if it was just that? Look, she was raised in a Christian context. That era, America was extremely Christian. Christianity was
very candid from her. She didn't mean anything, but you can always add layers of interpretation.
Yeah, and we impose that later because she grew up in a Christian context. So of course, her words are going to have a Christian idea behind them. So the Nag Hammadi library, for instance. Now notice Nag Hammadi. Hammadi is from Muhammad, right? Hammad, of course, the chosen, the not the chosen one, the praised one, right?
The coveted one. The coveted one, the desired one.
The coveted one, the desired one, yeah. It's interesting that Nag Hammadi, the Gnostic library, is named after Hammadi, of Hamad, Muhammad. Very, very weird. Understand? Just an oddity. And it's Nag. I always forget what the word Nag is. I can never remember what it means. It's Naj in the Egyptian dialect, but it means it's like, I don't know. Anyway, for some reason, I can never remember what that word is in English. But Hamad, understand? Muhammad, Hammadi of Muhammad, the Gnostic text. So this is the largest collection of Gnostic texts, right? 52 of them dating back to the 2nd century. and giving insights into the Gnostic literature. However, we don't know how they interpreted those texts. The Pauline epistles and the early church fathers tell us what early Christians believed and also how they interpreted, how they practiced. We have very clear ideas, whereas the Gnostics, it's all personal. They make it up as they go along. So Nag Hammadi lacks the epistles. Gnostics did not write their beliefs in explicit doctrinal language. So if you don't have explicit doctrinal language, you can make it up as an individual. So there's the possibility implied here, of course, that Islam was built on some of these ideas and people were going all over the place with it. And then they were forced to eventually add some kind of doctrinal limits to it to try to bring it to heel. But many of these ideas are still inherent in Islam today. They can't quite erase them completely. But do you think there's merit to what I'm saying here, Odon?
What's your question? Do I think? What do I think?
There's some merit to what I'm saying here.
Oh, you're completely right. It's this is how Gnosticism works. It works on secrecy and initiation. So you want if you write down your recipe, it can the secret is no more. This is how, for example, the Ku Klux Klan in the US sort of lost its influence. I read an article about it. I think it was in the 50s. Someone from the Ku Klux Klan published their secret codes, how they communicate with each other outside of their reunion, how they can recognize one another, and so on. And because it became public, all the interest for joining the clan was lost.
Okay, so there's no secret anymore.
The book Freakonomics. Maybe you read it also.
I know of the book. Yeah, I've watched interviews by the authors. Yeah, Freakonomics. Yeah,
but it's the same with Masonry. I watched some videos of Masonic initiation. You see, in the initiation, the apprentice is blindfolded, and he has to undergo some trials. He has to walk on a plank, and he doesn't know that the plank is the plank is like a bascule. He walks like this, tuk, 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 and at a moment the plank does like this.
Okay.
It drops, and because he's blindfolded, he's like, "Oh, what's happening to me?" Thereafter, he drinks from a cup. Someone gives him a cup of wine, and he gives him thereafter the very same cup, but with a very bitter liquid. And so he drinks. He thinks it's the same. Oh no, it's not wine. What it is? And so on. There is something with fire and so on. And so when you're blindfolded and you don't know about this, you're supposed to experience some spiritual stuff. But once you know about it, there is absolutely no point in doing such a thing anymore.
Right.
The secret has been published. Yeah. And this is why all this movement, this Gnostic movement, they rely so heavily on the secrecy.
So what may be implied here is that Nag Hammadi tells us that the preferred method of information transmission was oral, through oral allegory. So the secret knowledge was not written down to keep it secret. So we know that Islam was supposedly passed orally. It was preserved orally. It was explained and understood orally, right? Even though Islam grew up in a culture that was heavily written, everyone around them wrote. For some reason, there was no writing going on during the time of Momo, and for the next 200 years, which is completely, it goes against history, right? So it's possible they were trying to. There were elements of Gnostic allegory going on, of secrecy, of exclusiveness, of eliteness, and so on. But ultimately, it had to coalesce. Ultimately, it had to be written down. But there's still this element of it within the elite who have the original secrets. So it's just that I feel there's elements of this within Islam. We can see parallels there, right?
Of course, if you look at the Shia movement or the Alid movement, I've put it in my book. They're supposed to have emerged right after Muhammad's death and so on. But actually, what you come to realize is that the separation between Sunnism and Shiism is happened much later during the Abbasids, and also you come to realize that the Alids were part of the Abbasid coalition. They were part of the Abbasid power. And so they became a sort of internal religious force within the Abbasid Caliphate, with the practice of secrecy, initiation. But some of them became such as Ali, God's friend, Wali Allah.
The Awliya, which is a Sufi term for the friend of God, for the one who initiates with God.
Or Murad told me it's administrant of God. The term wali is not actually, it's not friend, it's not ally, it has a sort of political color or flavor in it. He translates it as administrant. But the thing is that there was a sort of
then you're a legal administrant, and remember, administrative practitioner, which is what I said is what the Sharia is. But it's understood today as friend. That's how it's understood. But
I was just telling all of this because this sort of secrecy within Islam exists since its very beginning. Even before Islam was actually named Islam, even before the divinization of the Quran, there were sort of secret societies within Islam. The one who recognized Ali as being the new Messiah, and his son, and his son after him.
What is the biggest secret society in the world? Brief pop quiz. The Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah. The Muslim Brotherhood. You think
millions
it's the biggest
of members? It's the biggest in the world.
There are more brothers in the Muslim Brotherhoods than Masons, for example.
Yeah, and not only that, they don't only have millions of members; they've got millions of adherents who support them and follow them and listen to them. So it's a massive movement. So, a couple of final points here.
You know that the Muslim Brotherhood was modeled upon the Hassan al-Banna. Hassan al-Banna, he was a Sufi. So he was a member of a Sufi brotherhood or brothership, a tariqa. And besides, he was strongly influenced. He was not a Mason himself, but he was very influenced by the
jury's out on that.
Of Masonry. Banna is builder.
Hassan the Builder. That's not his real name. His surname is not al-Banna. That's his nickname. Hassan the Builder. Builders with bricks. Masons. Oh.
Masons. Yeah, exactly. His mentor was the guy who had the newspaper Al-Manar. What's his name? In Cairo, he was a guy from Syria, and he was a Mason, His mentor was a Mason. I don't remember his name. But that's the thing. If you look at the Muslim Brotherhood, it's a sort of quintessence of all esoteric, Gnostic, Islamic, Masonic movements, all fused together.
No, don't forget the precursor to the guys, slightly off topic, but hopefully you're finding the discussion to be really enlightening historically and gives context to Islam, the bizarre idea that is Islam. But if you go back to the 13th century, 12th to 14th century, the precursor to the Freemason movement, which was a legitimate movement. I mean, you look at Bavaria, Germany in the 1700s, the precursor to them was the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians claim that they, so this is before the Rosicrucians were called that, before they revealed themselves publicly. They were apparently operating in Europe for 200 years before they decided to out themselves publicly. They claim that they got their information from Sufis in Muslim lands. So the inspiration of the Rosicrucians was Muslim, Sufi. And of course, the Muslims claim, the Sufis claim that they are the original Freemasons and that the European Freemasons, they founded that, they infiltrated Freemasonry into Europe, and that the Muslims are the true Freemasons. I mean, this is part of the Muslim creed again. So there's a, and of course, you look at the Shriners, who are Muslims. I mean, the whole culture of the Shriners, which is a higher level of Mason. All Shriners are Freemasons, but not all Freemasons are Shriners, and they are Muslim. They follow Ali and they follow Muhammad. Ali and Muhammad, and it's whole salam alaikum and all of that. It's all very, very Muslim. But discussion for another time. It's all on my channel. Look up my discussion of the KKK. I discuss all of that there. And the KKK, remember, the first symbol of the KKK was the Islamic crescent and star, and then they realized that was a little on the nose, and then they changed it and started burning crosses. Just so we know. So let's finish up this discussion. I probably won't get to all the slides.
Just a precision. The guy I was mentioning, Hassan al-Banna's mentor, his name is Rashid Rida. Rashid Rida for the audience.
You also have to check what the names mean, because the name might be a real name or a nickname, but also the names might have a meaning. So you need to check the meaning of the name, Rashid and Rida.
It's not Rida with two D's. It's only one D. So it's not okay. Right.
Yeah. So not all religious groups that use allegory are Gnostic or use allegory are Gnostic. However, the abuse of interpretive method allows them to usurp the symbols and the writings of just about any faith or any idea. They redefine them. The woke do this. They redefine. The word woman now means man, or the word woman means nothing. Everyone knows what a man is, but somehow we can't define women, and everything just becomes nothing. So they redefine ideas so that they become compatible with and then ultimately subordinate to their own teachings. So bear that in mind. Now, I think we'll wind down here because I don't want to get stuck into a topic and then I got to, break it and pick up next week. So I have covered this in the very first slide, and I said we'd come back to this, but I'll do this slide, I think, then we'll call it a night, Odon. I think we'll just, henotheism. To return to an idea, now we fleshed things out. Trans women are women. See, exactly as Andrew Martin said. So guys, I'll finish on this slide. So hopefully now, I opened with this slide in the very first series. I opened episode. I started with this slide as one of the first slides, and I've come back to it. Hopefully you have more context. Now, there are 8 concepts that are common across Gnostic groups, and they are by no means universal, but they are commonly held ideas or beliefs or concepts. The first is that the Gnostic idea of God is a hierarchical henotheism, and the creator God was called the demiurge, right? Watch my series on Gnosticism for more information. Now, the Gnostics believe there are many gods in the universe, but they only owe worship or allegiance to one of them. And this allegiance is never to the creator God, the demiurge, never to Yahweh, because Yahweh is evil. And of course, the Muslims will tell you, we worship the same God, except the Christian God is evil, which is a total contradiction, but this would make sense, correct? Within the pantheon, all of the nonsense gods are fundamentally equal except for the amount of light they contain. They're made from the same substance. So they don't owe allegiance to Albert, the Gnostic monad, who has the most light. And he emanates, right? He emanates gods, lesser beings from him. He gives birth, in other words. He emanates things. They pop out of him. Gnostics can pledge allegiance to eons that specialize in wisdom, truth, light, repentance, or personalities, such as Messiah, Christ, Jesus, Yahweh, Adonai, or Muhammad. Right? And this conflicts with Judeo-Christian monotheism. Now, let me go to why this is important. So I'll finish on this slide today before I step into let me finish on this slide. So final slide, and I'll call it a day. And hopefully this wraps up one section, right? So henotheism is the system of belief where you acknowledge a supreme deity, the supreme God. For the Gnostics, it's the monad, right, Albert, while also worshipping lesser deities or aspects. The worship of one God without denying the existence of other gods. So in this framework, the worship may recognize the supreme deity while honoring other divine beings or aspects of the supreme being. When you go through the Sirah, Muhammad is just an aspect of Allah. He's literally a piece of Allah. He's literally part of Allah. He's a deity on his own, at least in the Sirah. Gnostic context. So in Gnostic traditions, this often manifests as recognition of the monad, the ultimate source of all existence, the higher principle. But, and we saw this with this mitigated monotheism that Patricia Crone spoke of, they also worship lesser deities because the monad is far away. He doesn't care. Like Allah, he doesn't come to earth. He doesn't care. He's forgotten about us. engaging with local gods or demiurges that are responsible for the material world, right? So, in other words, you see that these other tribes, they engage with local deities, even though they acknowledged the one God. And yet they still see themselves as monotheists because these local deities are the one God. That rock in Mecca, that is God because it was made by God, it's part of God, and therefore it's not pagan worship, it's monotheism because it is that God. It's that's how they think. So in Gnostic sects, many Gnostic groups practice henotheism by venerating the monad while also recognizing and sometimes worshipping other divine figures. Mystery religions, some ancient mystery religions exhibited henotheistic traits. Followers would focus on one God while acknowledging a pantheon. So they were making, this is syncretism again. This is like making an excuse. You are saying you're worshiping one God while still acknowledging a pantheon, but the pantheon is made from the same substance as the other God, so therefore it's still monotheism. You're just not focusing on the main God. It makes no sense to us. It makes a lot of sense to them. So henotheism allows for a relationship with the supreme being and with localized deities. That's why also there were many deities that got rolled up into Allah, because if you look at the Quranic narrative, all of those deities in the Kaaba were expressions of Allah, right? You can look at it as that. And therefore, ultimately, you are still worshiping the one God. So you may as well just have the one God and just worship him alone. But we can find the truth somewhere in the middle. So I'll leave it here, Odon. I'm not sure that was my strongest ending, but your thoughts on this so far, no?
No, it's very interesting. The thing is, you see, I have a consultant, a strategy consultant background. And what my former boss used to say is that we have to be like a helicopter. You have to look at things from a very low altitude and to be able also to rise to a higher altitude to see the big picture. And so you have to be able to understand the details, to go into the details, not getting lost in the details, and also taking some rising to an altitude to get the big picture of it. So when we are talking here about the Mushrikun, the partnering ones, as Morad put it in his translation, the one who associate. And so there might have been many different type of associators. Mostly, I think they were Christians. But within these Christians, you might have some henotheists or Gnosticists and so on. But the thing is it's important. The details are important, but the big picture, I think, is more important. And you have to do a sort of interplay between the details and the big picture.
We're trying to reverse engineer.
Like a helicopter.
I'm
like
trying
this.
to reverse engineer here, doing some reverse engineering. No, it makes sense. I think they made a very broad box and they just lumped anyone who associates in there, and you were all Christians or all whatever. I mean, Christians were outside the box.
There is another dimension to it. It's the obvious. It's the numbers. I think most mushrikuns were Christians. 90%, 95% of them were regular Christians. So maybe they weren't very well Christianized. Maybe they were freshly Christianized. And some of them were heretics or Christian with other faiths, other stuff. But when you look at the Quran, mostly I think it's about regular Christians, and sometimes description could fit or could refer to henotheists, gnosticists, and so on.
Yeah. No, there's evidence for what you said about pagans that converted to Christianity but still retained that pagan flavor or cultural flavor. And, so there's evidence for that. There's definitely evidence for that. So I'm just trying to present additional data so that we don't use too many broad brushstrokes, but hopefully start to realize there's a lot of detail in the mess if we unravel the strands and we can start to understand what was going on with more specifics. and hopefully gives us a better appreciation of what was going on. So the plan was that next week I would finish with the Judaizers, as Crone discusses them, and add some thoughts to that. And we can infer from the Judaizers, who seem to have made their way into Arabia, why Muslims, why Islam hates St. Paul. We can, I think, through the Judaizers, we can create that connection as to why St. Paul is anathema in Islam. I think that we can answer that question. Now, finally, after 3 years, I can finally answer that question.
That will be very interesting.
Yeah,
and we also have, Lloyd, we also have, I also have to do this on your channel, a presentation about the Jerusalem thesis.
Okay.
That was the last part of my Qur'anic presentations.
Right. So yeah, we can decide if we do this next part or yours. We can alternate. That's fine. The audience can let us know in the chat what they prefer. So yeah, I've got, but I'd also like to continue and discuss some other scholars' perspectives on idolatry and mushrikun, because there's different perspectives, like idolatry in the Quran. There's different scholars with different views, and there's modern scholars' views and there's older scholars' views, and there are views that go back a century or more, right? That scholars have neglected. And so there's so much to discuss that brings, and modern scholars, I mean, do we really always trust them? There's question to question some of these interpretations. And so yeah, I thought, I mean, if you enjoy this, Odon, I mean, we can perhaps continue and just throw some ideas out and look how these ideas stand up.
Gladly. I also have a little grant announcement to make on behalf of Murad. Maybe you already told your audience, but in 2 days he will be publishing on his channel a huge presentation about his translation. His translation in English of the Quran. So I recorded a video with him yesterday, 2 days ago. So everything is fresh in my mind, and let your audience know that let them be alert and ready for Murad's presentation on the 1st of November on his channel.
Right. Yeah. So everyone, Murad's going to surprise us with the official launch as well. I mean, has he officially launched these Qurans? Yes, he has, right?
Yeah, he already has, but in his mind, the launch is the publication of this video.
Yeah.
For him.
So there's that, because and also I will have Murad on next Thursday and the Thursday after. So the 7th and the 14th, I've got Murad on to talk about his Quran. So so that's 9 p.m. And then also I'd love to have you and Jay Coleman Kane come on and discuss, because since he's an author and you're an author and you both have very converging ideas, he's got ideas for how the narrative was constructed by the authors to make a story. And he's got some fascinating, today was a great conversation. He's got some great ideas. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've learned something from this. I hope it made sense. And I need to say thank you to Anil Thomas, who just sent me a donation that was very, very generous and very kind. Thank you very much. And I must say thank you to Odon, who brings his wisdom, his knowledge, and his perspective, and for not melting me into a puddle, so at least my ideas seem to stand up to scrutiny. There's some merit to them. So that's fantastic. Thanks, audience, for the great chat and conversation. And please share this, talk to people, and hopefully we can explore Islam from a historical, analytical perspective and learn something. Take it apart, reverse engineer it, and understand just how it was made, fabricated. Final word to you, Odon, and we'll call it a night. And thank you all.
Well, I haven't prepared a conclusion. Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, everybody. See you soon on Lloyd's channel, on mine, and maybe in the real life, I hope.
Yep. So, guys, thank you all very much, and we shall see you guys soon. Have a good night and God bless.